Hi guys, my name is Rafael dos Santos. I'm 19 years old. I'm a student at Georgia Tech, and I'll be speaking to you about my story with the English language. So it all started back in primary school. In second grade, I had some really basic English classes, and I learned words like objects and colors, and expressions like "What's your name?" and "How are you?" but nothing really deep into linguistics. I remember having a lot of trouble with the word red, especially with the letters R and D, since those would be pronounced differently in Portuguese. So this is how red would look like in English pronunciation, red, and this is how I would pronounce it, hedgy. And as you can see, there are certain expressions and words that I would often mispronounce because I would confuse them and I would simply say them as they would sound in my native language. As old time passed, and I was learning English just in my regular school, elementary school, and my parents decided to put me in an institute just to learn specifically English. So that happens, and I had to go to the institute every Tuesday and Thursday after school for an hour and a half. And at the time, I found that really, really boring, and I had no idea why I was going there and why I had to do that, why I had to learn English. I never really noticed that I was learning a whole new language until I actually had to use it to communicate with someone who didn't speak Portuguese, my native language. And that mainly happened because I was taking English in the institute and the school at the same time. So I would see it more of a subject, school subject, rather than something special. In the institute, I expanded my vocabulary and I learned how to conjugate verbs. I remember learning the verb to be, and in Brazil in particular, this verb is quite famous because everyone who speaks English or is learning how to speak English in Brazil knows the verb to be because it's practically the main verb in the English language. At least that's how they teach us in Brazil. And I remember I was learning the verb and I had no idea what to be meant. I had 2 months of classes or something like that, and I was learning how to conjugate all the tenses of the verb, and I still had no idea what it actually meant until I had to speak with someone and I said, "Oh, I'm feeling sad," or "I will be going to this place," and I finally noticed what to be meant. My sister was going through the process of learning English at the same time as I was, but she was a couple levels above me, which meant that she was, and I have no idea why, but she still is, kind of better than me in English. And with that, I remember she used to talk to herself in her mirror, and I would glue my ear to her door so I could hear herself and make my pronunciation closer to hers so it's better. This all happened when I was 7 years old until I was 13. When I turned 13, a big change happened in my life, and I like to see it as a big impact and the turning point on my learning of the English language. I lived in Brazil my whole life, and literally every communication that I did was in Portuguese. One day my parents came in and they told me that we were gonna move to Bolivia. And this is the big change in my learning of the English language. I was gonna study in an American school in Bolivia, which meant that I would have to speak English with everyone on a daily basis for everything that I needed. I had never done that before and it was really scary at first. Before, in Brazil, I could simply speak in Portuguese and anyone would understand. And if I'm in English class trying to communicate myself in English and the teacher doesn't understand me, I could simply say it in Portuguese. But now English had turned into a necessity. I went to history class, math class, science class, and they were all in English. And I had no idea what the teacher was saying. I was completely lost. It was my first time learning school subjects like these in a different language. It was really strange for me to ask questions and to read the textbook in English. Overall, my adaptation to the English speaking system was quite slow and quite hard, mostly because of the language. And I tried speaking it at first, but it was really hard to fit in since I was new and I didn't really quite speak it very well. My friends would make fun of me and I wouldn't really fit in. As I got more comfortable with the language, I started actually thinking in English rather than in my native language. And since I was using English so much on a daily basis and not so much Portuguese, there were actually some words, specifically scientific terms, that I learned in English but I didn't know in Portuguese. For example, gallbladder. Up to date, I have no idea how to say that word in Portuguese. Eventually, the English language has allowed me to come to one of the best colleges in the world. It allows me to travel around, to communicate with other people, and it opens many possibilities for me and for my future. And although I still have an accent, that doesn't really hinder me in any way.